Welcome to Soul Lab, a Christian-based podcast utilizing logic, history, science, and scripture to better understand the Christian faith. And now your hosts, Delaney and AJ.
What is going on, guys? Welcome to Soul Lab. I am your host, AJ.
And I'm Delaney.
And we are super blessed to get to be here today with Christopher Beason, who is a world-renowned faith-based media professional, has been to almost 100 countries with his media company.
Yeah.
So, Christopher, we're super excited to get to have you on today.
I don't know about the world-renowned part, but
Almost 100 countries with your media. That's incredible. That's
98,
incredible.
right? 98?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So we're really excited to have him on today. But ready to get into it?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. Christopher, would you mind just telling us, I guess, a little bit for the audience about yourself? What do you do? Who are you? Your past history?
So my name is Christopher. I am also a media producer in different ways than you folks are, but similar too. I have a couple of podcasts. One is a weekly Bible study podcast, and another one is a weekly, we call it Stories Behind Mission and Ministry. Can I say the name?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Mission SONlight Chat.
Yeah.
So that's because we're based here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. We use CHATT. But it's just a fun conversation, kind of like what we're doing today with people who have found ways to do ministry in various walks of life. And some of them are ministers, of course. We love talking to people about their experiences, how they experience Jesus and so forth. We do a number of other media production things, live event production and so forth, but the weekly podcasts are really heavy with our production team right now.
That's incredible. So you manage both of those, but it sounds like you have a team that helps you with it. You have an editor and yeah, that's awesum. I need an editor. I could use that. It's a lot of work. I don't think people realize it. Right. It is a lot of work.
It is.
It's like the simple things, like just trying to get it posted is a lot of work, but yeah.
Yeah, I've got one guy in particular, Jordan, who does the lion's share of getting our podcast out. We were just talking, we're about to go to a live event. It's going to take about 3 weeks. So that's 3 weeks that we're not in the studio, 3 weeks that we're not editing. So he's got to do basically a month out. Then he's taking a week vacation, and then we have another event for a week and a half after that. So we're looking at about 6 weeks that he's trying to get things ready where he can just push the button, as some of the podcast platforms don't allow you to program weeks and weeks ahead of time.
Yeah, so you have to manually do it, which is really frustrating. Right. Yeah, and then of course it's like you have to, if you're going to be gone for that time, now you've got to pre-record so that you have content releasing regularly. That's been a difficulty of ours. We actually took a little break.
About 2 months.
We had a lapse of about 2 months where we just had so much going on this year where we weren't able to get the content ready in time. And so, unfortunately, so now we're getting back at it, which is good. And we got people lined up to come on.
We got married, so I feel like there's a little bit.
Well, we got married. We both grew businesses and then worked with nonprofits. It's just been a lot. Yeah.
So one of those events that we're going to, we'll be shooting about 50 podcasts while we're there. It's a ministry convention. Delaney's familiar with it. And so we'll be in St. Louis, Missouri, shooting about, like I said, about 50. We're hoping maybe a little more. So that'll give us a year out. And a new one drops every Thursday, Mission SONlight Chat. And Mission SONlight, the Bible study drops every Friday evening.
Wow. So you do weekly for both?
Yes.
That's a lot of work. That's awesome.
It is. Content for the Friday Bible study broadcast is actually just a church. Some churches might call it Sunday school. Adventists might call it Sabbath school, but it's a Bible study reading. So we're really just reading that content that's pre-produced by great writers a year in advance. So we just open up the book, read through that, read the Bible text. And it's designed for two kinds of people that are ministry minded in their local churches. They want to be prepared for the lesson, or they want to be prepared to teach. And this is one of the things that drove me. My brother-in-law is experiencing blindness. About a number of years ago, he had a brain tumor, but the blindness is affecting his ability to do Bible study.
Wow.
And so by doing that Bible study reading for him and for others, those with the visual impairment.
That's incredible.
So that's exciting for us.
Yeah.
It was kind of a personal goal, and it touched me in a real personal way.
That's
and
awesome.
What were the two podcast names one more time?
So the formal name for one is Mission SONlight Chat, and the other name, we love Mission SONlight, we love SON.
Okay.
Jesus is
that's
light.
awesome.
And then the other one is Mission SONlight Sabbath School Bible Study. Bible study, I think is how we did.
Yeah.
I don't look at the name, I just read it.
That's no problem. There's 5 trips too. Okay, thank you so much.
Well, definitely. I want to put that in the show notes so that people can go there and see that. I think that's incredible.
I'll say Mission SONlight Chat has been the most rewarding. The Bible study one is really just launched in the last couple of months, but the chat has been rewarding because people from all over the world, we have a huge group of people from Northern Africa or Western Africa rather, that are listening. It's like, how do we tune in? How do we connect with them? And then there's another one in Central Europe. There's another pocket of listeners and viewers because we do it on Facebook and YouTube as well as the podcast channels. So anyway, it's just a lot of fun to see it grow and having limited interaction with listeners and viewers so far, but we know they're there. They're clicking and watching and holding that audience for a little while.
Yeah, that's our thing. For us, this was meant to be more of a hobby, like something we felt called to do on the side. So when we started this, and neither of us really have the time to go interact with every viewer that comments on everything.
Yeah, you're on YouTube?
So that's our main platform. Okay. So I think we're on, Podbean, Spotify, Apple, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, kind of Facebook. But our main one is YouTube. Okay. Which shocked me because when we got into this, I didn't even know people watch podcasts on YouTube.
I almost exclusively watch it on YouTube.
I didn't know that was a thing. Yeah. I've always just gone to Apple Podcasts. But yeah, so if YouTube just took off and it's been good.
Maybe it's a female thing, Delaney, because my wife will listen to every podcast. She listens to the video version. And so she's glancing at the people. It's on the periphery. She'll doing her makeup. She'll be working. She's in not programming, but she does program and code some things. I couldn't tell you what she does really, but something really cool on the dark web. And she's working away. And how are you listening to that? I don't know. It's just good ear distraction. I don't know how she can tell me what she heard too.
See, I can't do that. Yeah. She does that. She'll be working all day listening to something on her phone.
Watching a podcast.
No, if I'm working, I have to be focused. I can't. I don't know. I can't.
Can you turn that off? I need to focus.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like when you're driving and you're trying to park, you're like, hey, can you turn the volume down so I can see? Can't focus.
Ladies really do multitask.
It's crazy.
It is. It's incredible. God made us all different.
Yeah.
And you also were a pastor or still are a pastor?
I formally pastored for about 10 years. Okay. Sometimes people will call me pastor, and that's fine. I'm still a pastor, but I am not working as a pastor with any denomination or any organization per se. But a lot of what I do will interact pastorally. I still help with funerals and do weddings and baptisms and so forth. So a lot of pastoral work still intersects with what I do. It's not a formal job description, no.
And were you raised, I'm curious about your upbringing, were you raised in a Christian home with a certain denominational belief, or what does that look like?
When we get a little bit into my story a little bit, you'll hear, but I can share this now. My first 4 years of life were in a very secular, worldly setting. And one of the things we're talking about is the grief experiences I've had just before maybe just after my third birthday. My birth mother, took her life. And so that secular experience led to my adoption, which led to a very different life. My parents were Methodist, and they were, I would say, devout Methodist. And so their journey was one that intersected with the cross of Christ. And so I went from a very secular, disinterested Christianity to, or I shouldn't say Christianity, but disinterested experience to a very committed Christian experience.
Just for our viewers, just to give them a heads up, this conversation today, we are really excited about. If you can't tell already, it's going to be a serious conversation. There's some serious things that Christopher is going to get to share with us today. And I won't steal any of his thunder. We are excited to talk about it because there's a lot of grace and love that we're going to get to talk about today through Christ. Amen. Through the pain and suffering that we endure in life. All right. I guess then let's do this. Let's get into it. I guess, Christopher, just take it away, setting the stage. You want to talk to us kind of about these life lessons and...
Sure. So my experience is not as dramatic as some have experienced. I've got some people who are very close to me, and I compare mine to theirs. I'm like, they've gone through so much more grief. They've gone through so much more heartache and challenge. What do I have to say? But at the same time, everybody, not just me, we all do have a story to tell. We all have a story of connection with Christ. Everybody, even the secular who don't even know they have that. God wants to reach every one of us, right?
Absolutely.
My story is this. As I mentioned before, in my third year of life, my mother took her life, and I certainly don't remember much, if anything, about that. There's a few pockets of memories that come up every now and then, and in my older years, I did meet my 4 siblings, 2 brothers, 2 sisters, and so we have compared notes and talked a little bit about that, how that affected all of us. We were all put into foster care. Our birth father, one by one, took the children back out of foster care and was able to care for them in his home. He'd been divorced from my mother, and Long story short, he didn't claim me. I was a after product post-marriage. For whatever reason, he chose not to come collect me. And so I was put into the adoption system, and my parents, Fred and Mary, picked me up on September 20th, 1974. And when they picked me up to take me for the day to a theme park in Central Florida. Mm-hmm. And the caseworker said, "You guys seem compatible. Why don't you keep him for the night?" I never went back.
Okay.
I was able to stay in their homes. Things were a lot more relaxed in the early 70s about adoption than they are so much today. It's a lot more expensive and a lot more of a process. But Fred and Mary were, as I mentioned, committed Methodists. They were committed Christians. Mm-hmm. And they wanted their family, their home, to be a Christian home. I had two older sisters that were birth children to my parents. And I didn't really feel like they treated me any different. Obviously, I was a novelty for a long time, a little bitty little guy, and I was probably cute back then. And so my sisters loved me, and I just felt like I was in a very warm and loving home. My mother tells an experience about how I walked into the grocery store for the first time with her, and my parents' practice, no criticism of anyone else's faith practice, but my parents' practice was not to consume alcohol. And so we walked in, and there was the beer section, and I went over to that because that's what I was familiar with. Mm-hmm. Oh. The first thing on the grocery list was to go and buy alcohol. And so my mom was like, "No, Christopher, we don't drink alcohol. We feel like it's not good for our bodies." And I don't really know how I reacted to that, but my mom said that was my first response, was that was where we go when we go to the grocery store.
Yeah. Interesting.
Well.
So it was a different culture for sure. I don't remember, as I said, I don't remember a lot about that experience, but as I got older, it started to make me wonder, particularly when I was in my 20s and I started wondering about family. Mm-hmm. And then I searched, and I didn't know it, but my siblings were also searching for me, and we connected through something that I don't even think exists anymore, AOL White Pages.
Yeah.
And so that was in
And how old were you at this time?
When I found them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was in 98, the spring of 98. I was looking in 97 and 98. This is kind of an aside, I was going to Europe for a religious convention, going to London, and I needed a passport. And in the course of getting my birth certificate for a passport, because I didn't have it anymore, my parents didn't have it anymore, Vital Statistics Office in the state of Florida where I was born sent what also they felt like was related information besides what I needed to get the birth certificate that I needed. And in the course of that, I learned information about my birth family, which made me curious. Mm-hmm. And for a long time, I'd had a friend who also had been adopted, was a little older than me, and told me I should find out more about my medical history because as you get older, medical information is important, right? When that came together, I started just being curious, just casually curious. And in the course of a few months, I started digging in more and was able to, not terribly hard, to chase down relatives. I started calling the phone numbers that were listed and eventually landed on an ex-wife of one of my brothers. And she screamed on the phone, "They've been looking you for years."
Wow.
So anyway, ended up spending half the night that evening, that morning, talking to a couple of the siblings and so forth. We made plans to meet, and they have gone through their own grief process from that experience, probably much more harsh than I am because they were still connected to all the parties that were involved. And I was a kid and didn't know anything and had moved on. I want to say something about my parents, Fred and Mary. They eventually converted to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And I love the Methodist, was a music minister in the Methodist Church, not raising up one denomination over another. But in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, they had something at our church called Vespers, which was like a Saturday evening as opposed to a Sunday evening service. A Saturday evening service, very like this, very informal.
Yeah.
And they didn't have anybody to do that. And they asked me as a 14-year-old boy, 15-year-old maybe, 14-year-old I think, if I would be in charge of that.
Oh, really?
I mean, here I am.
That's a lot of responsibility.
Here I am, a kid.
Yeah.
And they asked me to do it, and I got on it.
Yeah.
So I started planning things, and my mother collected Ideals magazine, which had, for every season, there were articles and there were stories, and I would assign church members things, and we'd come together and we'd read for Vespers, and then we sing songs.
Oh, that's cool.
And so my parents obviously facilitated that, but it was my first real memory of leadership and having an opportunity to lead, and my church trusted me. And I don't care what denomination you are, that's so crucial for youth and young adults to give them opportunities, even if they screw it up. And I'm sure I did. I don't remember. I'm sure I flustered somebody somewhere behind the scenes, but I never felt put down. It's funny, they assigned a woman named Deborah to be the assistant leader for this. My recollection is she would have been in her 40s, maybe mid 40s. She always was very interested in what I had to say. She didn't boss me around. She didn't make me feel like she was in charge.
Yeah.
I looked to her as my first leadership mentor.
Yeah.
I don't know where she is today, but the whole thing was a really powerful experience for me to take my experience and lead.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful for that.
I think that's awesome. I am a firm believer. I think this is something that society doesn't do a good job at, but I think the younger someone is, giving them responsibility as young as they can handle it. Obviously not too young and not too severe of a responsibility, but the younger you can give someone responsibility and let them handle it, the more mature they will be and the faster they can become great leaders. And so I'm a firm believer in, for example, I try and hire people into my companies at 14 years old to go ahead and give them leadership skills, training, experience, responsibility. And it's going to help them thrive long term.
Sure.
I think that helped you at 14 to get that responsibility. I mean, it probably encouraged you, gave you some training and resources that most 14-year-olds didn't get access to. Definitely some good experience. And I bet you that's impacted a lot of your life. That's really cool.
It has. And I've looked for opportunities, because as you build somebody up in the corporate experience that you have, I mentioned Jordan a while ago. He's been working for me for 19 years.
Oh,
He
wow.
started as a lab assistant at his college, helping me with editing, because I started Network 7 as the umbrella corporation for Mission SONlight. And so I was solo, just by myself, and he helped me. And I said, hey, when you graduate, you've got a job. I was really impressed with him in the lab.
Yeah.
And he's been with me, like I said, for 19 years.
Oh, that's crazy. That's awesome.
So
yeah.
kind of Proverbs 22:4. I gave Delaney that text, by humility and fear of the Lord. But adjacent to that text is Proverbs 22:6. Train up a child in the way they should go. Jordan wasn't a child, but he certainly was a young adult, and giving him that opportunity to train. Now he does circles around me in our production world and what we need. And I'm not bossing him so much anymore. He tells me what we need and we get it done.
Hey, you've let him. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mentioned my first real grief experience, losing my mother, not completely wrapping my head around that because I was just a kid. Second experience, we all have disappointments and things in the journey. When I finally wholly embraced what I believe was the call of God on my heart and on my life to serve him full-time in ministry, I received a call to be a pastor. And so I pastored, as I said, for almost 10 years. I don't want to get into all the experiences, but I lost that job after about a decade. And the grieving process, I didn't even know I was grieving. I didn't understand the steps of anger and depression and bargaining and so forth. I didn't understand all that, but I was grieving and I didn't know it again. And it was hard to figure out how to rebuild. And that's actually where Network 7 was born.
Oh, really?
Again, I mentioned the leadership as a kid. Here I was again on my own, but the president of the conference that terminated me, he and I had some serious conversations about media and the need for media in the Southeast here, Christian media that did unique things and also helped small local churches. As large churches tend to have the resources and the people resources too, to do media things like we're doing today, or to have large productions for their worship services, or really whatever they want to do. They can find a way because they've got people and they've got money, right? He and I had some conversations when I found myself without work. My wife, Christy, and I said, okay, if she can work for a little while and cover our household expenses, maybe I could develop this media idea that he and I had discussed that had never gotten off the ground. And we prayed about it and we prayed about it and we just couldn't let it go. The Lord just made it clear again and again. Other people were like, you worked in media. So media ministry is what it was. And so Network 7 was born out of that.
Yeah.
Another leadership opportunity, of course.
Yeah.
My experience of working in the lab, the little bitty lab there at the college where Jordan was the lab assistant. I did a video production for a church that had a ministry called Kingdom Kids. I don't know, Delaney, have
I
you ever
remember
heard of Kingdom Kids?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we did this little music video with these kids singing I'm a Kingdom Kid. That was kind of the theme song. And then they were building a new church, so the pastor wanted a video that kind of hyped up the building and helped with the building fund and whatever. So there was a little fundraising aspect to that. So that kind of got the wheels turning. And fast forward 2 years, and there was another ministry called Mission SONlight that spotlighted missions, global missions.
Oh, that's awesome.
They were retiring, the people that were doing this Mission SONlight. Just in the back of my head, I thought, boy, that would be fun. That would be neat. I wish I could be like them. Our pastor at the time, Pastor Greg, said to me and Jordan, you guys ought to think about doing that because we really have a need for that.
Yeah.
That just passing comment, it impacted us in a way that we said, wonder if we could do this.
Yeah.
So we started contacting resources within the church because I had continued to do some video and media production with various entities in the church, even though I wasn't employed there. And so that developed into a partnership with an organization that helped us get addresses and send out mailing to invite people to get these mission videos. And so in July of 2007, Jordan and I went to Trinidad, Tobago, down in the Caribbean, where they were building new boys' dorms at a college down there. And that was their mission project. So that was our first story that we shot. And then we went from there to, we've been to almost 100 countries. I think I went to Chile here at the time of this recording about 2 weeks ago. And that was our 98th country, I think.
Wow.
That's awesome.
That is incredible.
And of course, we've been back to many countries
repetitively as
revisit
well.
them. Yeah. So that's been a lot of fun having the missions, what we call the Mission SONlight flagship production, which is these mission stories. And of course, when podcasts started becoming a real big thing, we thought, okay, we need to think about how we can do this. And so that's where Mission SONlight Chat came from. Was we have all these people we talk to on site, but we don't really have a way of sharing the stories behind because they've got stories. You're telling me about this project, we're building this at this school or at this church or at this hospital. What's your story?
Yeah.
And what are your hopes and dreams in ministry?
Yeah.
It's grown, obviously,
That's
from
amazing.
there.
That's incredible. 100 countries?
Yeah. Wow. So if I had my wife and I were talking, maybe it was yesterday, if I had stayed employed with the church, God could have done things. No doubt about it.
Sure.
I would have been happy. I probably would have moved into some sort of leadership, administrative position, working for the church. No problem with that. That's fine. But the opportunities that he gave me out of losing my job,
Yes.
of seeing a different vision, filling a niche that needed to be filled. And to be honest with you, I sometimes scratch my head because I've told people sometimes God wants to get you from A to Z. He takes you way over here.
Yeah.
And I've always connected the dots that, okay, losing my job to Mission SONlight. But now as I'm doing these Mission SONlight chat podcast, I'm looking at the impact that they're making and really hearing the stories behind the stories. I'm like, maybe Mission SONlight for almost 2 decades was just a mechanism for us getting to this. This is where there's real meat. This is where there's really something interesting. I don't know. I'm happy to be on the journey with God and whatever he's leading us.
Yeah.
But I do know that rarely does God put us in a straight line to get us where he wants us to go.
Yeah, absolutely not. No, it's so interesting because there's so many times in my life as well where I've had an experience happen and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is just awful. And then something good comes out of it. Or vice versa. I think something's going to be amazing. I'm really excited about it. Turns out to be something I'm like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be involved in that. And so I walk away from it. But anyways, I say that to say, it's interesting because we're these finite creatures with these finite brains, finite capacity. God is this infinite being with this incredible game plan. And it's like we're trying to play checkers and he's playing like infinite dimensional chess. And so I think we have to humble ourselves because a lot of people, we have to try and not get arrogant and think we know exactly what we're supposed to do, but instead continue to be humble and say, well, I'm just going to do what I feel like the Holy Spirit convicts me of, but be open-minded to God's plan. And it takes a lot of humility to get there because as human beings, we all want certain things. We all want, for some people, it's worldly. We want worldly things. Or sometimes we get distracted by things that we think are good, but we have to be open to the idea, like at any point in time, God can pivot our plan, I guess.
And I was even going to say, because I went on a mission trip with a group and you went on the mission trip as well. And I'm thinking it was a Mission SONlight thing that you were doing. Yeah,
I did a Mission SONlight story
That's
on the
what
trip.
I was thinking, yes. And I remember I went on that trip 6 times. And the trip that you were on with Mission SONlight was definitely more, I would say, memorable. I think just because of the excitement that you brought with filming it and with bringing that like other element into it. And so it's even impacted my life in a way in which you would think she's been to Belize 6 times, but no, that trip specifically was very impactful because of that. So it's kind of cool to think of that
that's
too.
cool.
I'm recalling, were you one of our interviews while we were down there?
I think I was.
Yeah.
I
We were
forgot
talking
about
to
that
youth and
too.
young adults about, they're building a school down there, if I remember
Yes.
right. A lot of our projects that we shoot overseas are educational related for sure.
I'm going to have to go find that interview.
Yeah. I was covered in paint. I remember that now.
I'm definitely going to find that interview.
I can get that for you. We can
Did you?
even put the link in the bio.
Yes, it'll be in the show notes. Oh, I love it. But no, but also just I wanted to reference something that you mentioned earlier. You talked about faith-based media, and I think that media naturally in our day and age is not faith-based. Secular, if anything, it goes against our morals and values.
Absolutely.
And I feel like if it's not naturally going to align with our morals and values, so people have to step up and put faith-based media out there to almost combat it. I was talking with a guy, local Chattanoogan, he's in producing short films, movies, TV shows. And he was explaining to me that's a huge opportunity industry because no one naturally is going that direction. No one naturally, unless someone is purposely, intentionally being a director with the idea of directing, with getting Christian morals out there, spreading the gospel, it's just not going to happen. If anything, it's the opposite. And so I say that to say, if anyone listening is on the fence about starting anything, faith-based media, it could be social media, podcasting, books, audios, whatever, I would say do it because we need more of that in society. I think it's beneficial.
Yeah.
We're looking at winding down the Mission SONlight, the formal DVDs, the mission videos. We'll still cover material from that, but we're looking at winding down the ones that go directly to churches, and churches then can pull the podcast and they can watch the stories there.
Oh, yeah. I like that.
Because that's the way media is going. So you may do something for a season, but do something if the Lord's calling you to do it, whether it's a year or 5 years or 2 decades, as we've done with Mission SONlight. Just see what the Lord opens up.
Yeah.
I like that. Be open-minded to what the Lord calls you to do. I mean, that's how our podcast really started was, I guess, just to summarize, but because we have a whole episode we actually did on this, but
I think we say it every time we have a guest too.
do we really?
Yeah.
Oh, I'll just say, so the way it started was I was doing research one day on what would discipleship look like in the modern world. Okay. If I wanted to spread the gospel to a large number of people today, Paul used letters. That's probably not the most efficient thing. And that's when I realized, podcasting, right? I can reach a large number of people that way.
I had been trying to get into podcasts.
And she had been trying to get me to podcast with her. And so that's when it connected. And we were like, okay, if we want to reach a large audience quickly, efficiently, podcast is probably the way to do it.
So let me pull in, I mentioned before, we have 1,000 listeners in West Africa. And so first of all, we need encouragement. We need to know that somebody's using what we're putting out there. We'd like it to go to more than 5 people, right?
Yeah.
So we have our largest audience in Central Europe, West Africa, and of course the U.S. I don't know the exact science of the math of that, if you will.
Yeah.
But there is something to the metrics that God multiplies, or if you want to use the term ripples.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. I love that. Talking about the science, I think we're a little bit going to get into looking at your notes. I have my own notes, but looking at the grief too, of how that kind of affects the brain. And I kind of want to ask a couple questions.
Okay.
You're being incredibly vulnerable with us today and opening
it.
up about some very personal things, and we seriously appreciate it.
Yeah.
So we're going to ask questions.
The first 2 were fairly easy. The third one's a little bit tougher.
Okay. Yeah.
Are you ready to get into it?
Sure.
Or?
I mentioned my wife, Christy. We started Network 7 in 2005. So it's this summer, 20 years. This podcast will probably come out about the time it's exactly the 20th anniversary.
Oh, wow.
And it's been a labor of love. It's been a tremendous labor of love. In 2021, as you all recall, I hate that being the waymark, but it is what it is. COVID was happening. My wife and I Christy and I attended a ministry convention in Orlando. We were wearing masks and being careful and distancing, but things were starting to feel more, people were a little more relaxed. And so we're at this convention, and on the way home from the convention on Sunday evening, we're driving, and it's about an 8.5-hour drive. Jordan and I were riding up front because he had come to help man our booth there. She is in the back seat sleeping, and she had slept almost the whole trip. And she was a sleeper, so I wasn't totally alarmed by that, but that was a little more than usual. And she said, I'm just not feeling good. Just too much, a lot of stuff going on, and probably hadn't had enough water, a little dehydrated and so forth. So wasn't totally alarmed at all. Monday, we were home unpacking, kind of taking the day off. And on Tuesday, I was scheduled and did travel to Liberia, which is where some of my West African connections. I'd been helping the church with a business project over there. And so Tuesday I was scheduled to leave. She still wasn't feeling top of her game, but we were doing a few things around the house and just enjoying those last few hours. Tuesday morning, woke up, and that particular Tuesday before I left for Liberia was one of those relaxed moments where things were ready. And we did something we didn't normally do. We stayed in bed and just relaxed and talked about what was coming a little longer than usual, maybe till 8 or 8:30, which normally we were up 6-ish. So we had a really nice morning. She still wasn't feeling completely great. Midday, we went to, I love Thai food. We went to my favorite Thai restaurant here in town. near the airport, went and had lunch, and she dropped me off. And I remember that kiss distinctly. I remember where we were standing outside the Chattanooga airport distinctly. Looked back, waved by. I'll see you in a couple of weeks. I think I was scheduled for a 3-week trip that time. And I don't normally do trips that long. There's been a handful of them. But there were, with this Liberia project, there were coming where there were a lot more, where they were several weeks long, just to get training done for people and develop the construction project around it and so forth. So I was gone that first week. Well, she still wasn't feeling well, and eventually went and got tested, I think maybe the following Monday. Yep, it's COVID. I was busy. I was different time zones and so forth. And so by Tuesday, she's got COVID. She's not going to work. My daughter, one of my daughters was living at home then, adult daughters now. And so she was checking on mom and taking care of her. And things seem to be okay. Our office for Network 7 is also based out of our home. We have an office down in the basement, and Jordan was there working at the time. Jordan was consistently there, and people were around. It wasn't like she was alone or there was nobody caring for her. And the updates were, she's just not feeling well. So on Tuesday, I decided I was going to FaceTime. I hadn't seen her in a few days, and she'd sent a text that she'd really had a rough night. And so in FaceTiming with her and seeing her face, she could barely lift her head off the pillow. She was weak and tired, and I said, this doesn't look good. Let's get you to the hospital and see if we can get you some treatments there and do better. I really nudged them and was around and said, hey, let's get her to the hospital. So Wednesday, this was late Tuesday, Wednesday, they took her to the hospital. She was too weak to get to the car. Jordan actually came upstairs, carried her to the car.
Wow.
A friend of ours, Debbie, came over and drove her to the hospital. And of course, with COVID cases still being in the hospital, they wouldn't let any ancillary people come in. I couldn't have come in if I'd have been there. So they took her in, didn't have any rooms for COVID patients. So they had a section of the ER sectioned off that was specific for COVID. And so she was in there, but I have a bonus son. We have a bonus son, and he's a medic. So he was able to look in on her when he would come in for calls. So I felt comfortable. Our friend Debbie that I told you took her to the hospital. Her son was a nurse there at the hospital. And so we were getting what I felt was good updates on how her progress was. And I just said point blank, do I need to come home? No, she seems to be responding to the medication. And she was for about 24 hours. Friday morning, she was not well. And the doctors had frantically called me overnight a number of times. And of course, my phone had been on Do Not Disturb. And I woke up late that Friday morning. It was a lazier day, and saw all these messages or all these missed calls. So I started calling them back and finally got in touch with the right person because it had been hours later. And she had a serious reversal. All of her organs just rebelling against the medication and against COVID. And she ultimately was having multiple cardiac arrest, and they needed to know, do we continue to resuscitate? It was easy to make the decision, not because it was an easy decision, but because she and I had done our wills like a week and a half before.
Yeah.
Wow. When I left, one of the things that she was doing was mailing those back. So it had been really fresh in our minds what our end-of-life decisions were to be. And both of us didn't want resuscitation, so she didn't. And so I said, no. I said, if you're telling me this is it, we have to let her go. I immediately, there's only one flight out that I could get on a day, 8:30 at night. So I immediately called and changed my previous flight to this flight and was coming home Friday evening. There was a stop on the way home in Mali, and I was on the tarmac when I got the call that she was gone.
Wow.
I was quite a mess. And people all around me were like, what's going on with this guy? I was bawling, and I was sick. It was just horrible. My 3 daughters, here I was, a world away. I had to call them. Fortunately, my sisters, amazing women, knew that things weren't well, and they had already started driving to Tennessee. Was it driving or flying? I guess, I can't remember, but they connected with my daughters, and I guess they flew up because it was so serious. And my daughters went down to Atlanta and picked them up. And they were driving back when I called one of them and let them know. So they were able to break the news to my twin daughters. And then my older daughter, she was living in Mississippi at the time. Delaney, you know her. And so I called and said, hey, you guys need to pull off. I need to talk to you. And of course, she immediately lost it. She knew the news wasn't good. Hard does not describe that experience.
Yeah.
Having to tell them that and then not be able to hold them.
Yeah.
Knowing that even if I had been home, I wouldn't have been able to be in the hospital. I would have gotten this news the same way I got it a world away. Incidentally, the people I was traveling with to the airport, the local church leader, the head of the conference there, the head of the union, which is a group of conferences, rode with me to the airport. Their driver, I had become friends with him because he had been my driver for a number of things, and another friend. They all began weeping. I was FaceTiming, just an aside. Technology, we talk about how cool it is to use this for ministry. Technology allowed me to connect with her at that last moment, tell her I loved her.
Okay.
A doctor in the hospital was a friend. You may know Eric.
Yeah.
And our pastor, Jason, they allowed pastors to come in for extenuating circumstances. They were both able to go in, mask up, suit up, whatever, go in with her. Debbie's husband, Vaughn, was able to FaceTime. And so the four of us were together and we had an anointing service for her. We assumed she heard. We assumed that she was able to pray that prayer with us, just knowing that things were not long.
Yeah.
And they put the phone down there and it was just her and I. And I was able to tell her I love her and that I would see her one day soon. And those were precious final moments.
Yeah.
And I know others have been through some terrible grief, but this was the worst thing I've been through in my life. So I got home, and for some reason, I've been thinking about this a lot lately. I pulled into my front yard, and we live, Rachel, Delaney, you've been there.
Yeah.
The whole yard, we have a gravel drive, the whole grass, the gravel, everything was filled with cars. The house was full of people. And just pulling up with that was overwhelming. I'm thankful they were there. I didn't have to walk into an empty house, but it was overwhelming. I just had to pause there. Lord, I don't know what to do next. I was overwhelmed with how to greet my kids, how to see my friends, the people that loved us. And of course, my sisters were there. How do I put one foot in front of the other?
Yeah.
And my friends were so gracious. They just stepped back from the car and they just gave me space to figure out how to do that, literally. Put one foot in front of the other, and one by one, my daughters came out. They saw I wasn't coming and embraced me. And we had that moment because for me, it wasn't about me. It was about them.
Yeah.
It was about what to do for them, how to help them get through this process. And we did. We planned a service a week later. Her parents came and we figured out how to do and what to do next. And we did it. There were rarely moments where you go, okay, how do I do this next? You just process. You've got to do something. You've got to do something next. So I'm not the kind of person who literally sat with the intellectual moment and said, okay, this is the idea. This is what we're going to do. And then we try to do it. And if we need to veer or pivot or whatever, we just did. I think back to when Christy and I had the twins and we had the older daughter as a toddler. She was 27 months, I think, when the twins were born. People said, how did you do it with twins and having? We didn't really think about it. It was just, we just did it.
Yeah.
So that was kind of how I navigated these moments too, was, okay, something has to be done. Flowers, planning, service, pastor, guests. You just go down a checklist and other people are there to help you with the checklist. So you just process that way and you don't process sometimes. You're shocked. So you just move through it and you have moments where you're bawling and then moments where you're really clear and you want to check out what other people's needs are and so forth. Grief is a really, not humorous, but a really funny thing. You talk about the science of things, and Scripture tells us in a number of places about loss and David's loss, Abraham and his grief for the people in Sodom. He pre-grieved them and he watched that brimstone fall. And
you see him go through the stages of denial. He bartered with God as much as he could.
Isn't that something? What an example of bargaining.
Surely.
But there's so much grief and sadness in Scripture. There's easy ways to find it. Sometimes grief terrifies us. And one of the passages that was meaningful to me, if you'll let me read that.
Please do. Please do.
And this goes to my loss in the loss of my job. Genesis 50, verse 20, Joseph has his brothers before him and they're fearful. They're afraid. They're grieving what they did to their brother. They lost him. They thought, okay, their father had gone through his grief of the loss of a child. But Genesis 50:20 here, his brothers are in front of him. And I'll back up to verse 18. His brothers went, fell before his face and said, "Behold, we are your servants." I mean, here Joseph was the second most powerful man in the land of Egypt. Ooh, and we did this to him. We put him here.
Yeah.
But they didn't. Verse 19, Joseph said to them, "Do not be afraid, for I am in the place of God." Yeah, it's okay. You didn't put me here. God let this happen. And then the most powerful verse here, verse 20. "As for you, you meant evil against me." Sure you did. But God meant it for good, in order to bring it about as it is this day, to save many people alive. And then he says in verse 21, "Don't be afraid. I'll provide for you and your little ones. Be comforted." And he spoke kindly to them.
Yeah.
People have asked me how I could, and I've had a number of conversations and progressed in my relationship with that president who I felt betrayed by. How could I do that? How could I speak kindly to him? I've seen him. I just saw him maybe 3 weeks ago, and we had a nice conversation. And we talked about ministry. We talked about grief. Not long, maybe a year plus ago, I saw him at a funeral, and I was asked to speak at that funeral. And he came up to me and shared how he appreciated that. And people from our experience in the conference were also at that. It was for a pastor that we had worked together, my pastor actually, from my youth, and then I pastored with him also. People are just amazed that I'm able to speak kindly to him but I'm not saying he meant it for evil. I do think that he could have made some better decisions in the process, and he took care of himself. So I would like for him to have chosen some different things, but the point is, he meant it for one thing. God meant it for good.
Yeah.
Look at what's happened with Mission SONlight.
Yeah.
I've had the privilege of baptizing more than a dozen, dozens, I haven't counted really, of baptizing people and sharing the gospel with millions of people through Mission SONlight, and also funding the gospel being shared with millions of people for Mission SONlight.
Yeah.
So fast forward to, I've lost my wife. Here I am with 3 adult daughters who are on their journey. One of them married, one of them about to be married 2 months after she passed away, and then a year and a half later, another one to be married. So how do I dad where my wife has been the most amazing parent to them, friend to them, kicking me when I'm not being the sharpest dad tool in the box? You need to do this. You need to approach this differently. You need to talk to them about this. I'm telling you this, but you can't let them know that you know, but you need to be aware of this so you can frame things differently. She just was an incredible mentor to me, not as just a spouse, but just as a friend, and helping me through the adult daughter-dad relationship. So all that was gone. It was on my own. How do I figure this out? And then, of course, I began to reflect on the fact that I was lonely. I remember going down to see my dad a month later in Florida, same city where she had probably contracted the illness. And I just began, my dad and I got in his car, and I began weeping. I said, "Dad, I'm just so lonely." That loneliness nearly killed me. And being told by people, by friends that I was close to, that I trusted, you can't look for anybody for a year. You can't look to fill that loneliness for a year. I just couldn't have imagined having to be in that dark spot for a year. And nobody knew what I'd gone through except other men who had lost their spouses. So I started calling them and asking them if they would go to lunch. So I almost weekly for a number of months had a lunch with another man who had lost his spouse. No one had lost a spouse so young. Very few had lost a spouse suddenly because of they'd lost them over illness for a long period of time. And in Christy's case, it was illness, but it was sudden. In my mind, it was in 48 hours from us knowing that she was really sick. But I began to try and find widower mentors that I could talk to. And I did talk to some ladies who had also lost their husbands about their loss as well. Our previous pastor had, in Delaney, you may remember this, I don't know if you were attending the same church with me at the same time, but Pastor Jeff had passed away on a mission trip.
I forgot about that.
He had been out on a mission trip and passed away suddenly, just collapsed while they were out climbing. Nothing too exerting. He was a runner and he's fit. He was about the age that I am now.
Okay, yeah.
And I'd like to say he's young.
Yeah.
Good job.
Thank you.
And so I spoke with his wife and just, she's like, you gotta wait, you gotta go through. And so a number of people were saying, hey, be careful. And what they were doing, they were looking out for me to make sure I wasn't taken advantage by somebody who said, oh, yeah, here's this guy who's doing this, success in life and whatever, and you're just trying to make a move and opportunistic and that kind of thing. They were looking out for me, and I appreciated that to a degree, but I just, can I go out to dinner with somebody? No, be by yourself. Weekends, I wouldn't even stay home. I don't want to be at my church. I didn't want to. So I'd go with family. I'd go with friends. We'd go hiking.
Yeah.
And it became a theme. When I'd show up, they'd say, okay, where do you want to hike? Even people that didn't hike, they would say, oh, we found these nature trails. We've never been, but you want to go on those? People just, because I found my best connection, my best stability with God was to get out in nature. Even to a degree, I didn't want to be in this a lot.
Yeah.
I was angry. I definitely mastered that anger to a point. I'd heard people talk about being angry with God and yelling at God. I thought, well, that's kind of blasphemy. That's kind of bad. As a pastor, I struggled with empathy for them. You need to move past that. Guess what? I was in the thick of it. I was in the middle of it. So all kinds of emotions, all the 5 steps of grief. Delaney, help me remember them, because I think people
I was
should
curious.
know
I
what they
actually
were.
wrote them down.
I know
so I'm
there's
just terrified.
anger.
Yeah.
I know
Anger.
there's bargaining,
Denial.
depression,
You said that earlier, and acceptance.
and acceptance.
It's
And
5
you-
stages.
Yeah, and I think it was you, maybe it was you said earlier, it's not linear. Like you go all
Oh,
over
no,
the
no.
place. Yeah.
Sometimes 2 or
Go
3
back
at
and
once.
forth.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Christopher, so much. So that concludes part 1 of this episode. Stay tuned, because in 2 weeks we'll release part 2. I have been your host, AJ.
Delaney.
See you guys next time.
Okay.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Soul Lab with AJ and Delaney. You can find all materials referenced from today's episodes in the show notes. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, comment, and subscribe. Check out our website for more episodes and stay tuned for the next release. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.